Hey there, flaming is one of the main three ways of upgrading your equipment in GMS Reboot. At this point, star forcing and cubing have been pretty much figured out, and you can just use a calculator to see how much it's going to cost and what is an efficient way of using your money. But when it comes to flaming, it's much less intuitive. When you pick up an item, or when you use an Eternal or Rebirth Flame, you get green numbers that add bonus stats to your item. Now, how can you tell if a flame is really good or really shitty? But more importantly, between those two extremes, how can you tell if a flame is almost good or is actually right where you want it to be? So to simplify things, let me introduce with you guys the flame score so you can tell the quality of any flame that you will find ever. So the reason I called the flames unintuitive is because intuitively you would just look at the number of range increase when you hover over an item to see if the item is better or not. If you could eliminate the variables of star force and potential, then the difference in range increase would be 100% explained by the difference in flame stat. However, the range increase from your flame depends on the balance of your stat between your main stat, secondary stat, percentage of any stat, magic, weapon attack, percentage magic and weapon attack, and in some cases even how much HP, MP, and percentage HP and MP you have. The latter one is specifically in the case of Kana and Demon Avenger. Because all of these stats and these total amounts are constantly in flux, we don't really look at the range change, rather we take into account the general amounts of these stats that you will have in the relevant stages of the game, as shown in my How Strong Is Your MapleStory Character Really video. In other words, rather than looking at which flame gives you the most damage right now, I will help you tell the quality of your flame so you can future-proof them, which is way more financially efficient. So to simplify these green numbers, we redirect them to flame scores. This score represents a rough estimate of the total amount of main stat your flame would be if we redirected all of the relevant damage sources for your character into main stat. So as you can see in this grid here, the relevant stats are mentioned in the first column. Late game and end game are separated because they have different balances of all of these relevant stats. So the way that they interact with each other and the quality that they have comparative to each other will change as you fund your character further. These stages are the same stages as found in the How Strong Is Your MapleStory Character Really video. And you can use this calculator here, made by Sethy Boy from my community, as a helpful tool when you're getting started with flame scores and you can't really do things by eye yet, and you want to make sure that you're not making any mistakes. Shifting between late game and end game on the top left of the calculator will help you determine whether the flame is long-term proof or not. Calculator also takes into account exceptions, so I'll quickly highlight these exceptions. Demon Avenger doesn't even use the calculator at all. Mainly what you do in late game is you aim for tier 6 HP, and that's it. In the end game, you take the same tier 6 HP and you try to add as much weapon attack as possible, ideally a 6, because that's the highest possible outcome on a powerful Rebirth Flame. Shadower, Dual Blade, and Kadena, these three classes have two secondary stats in Strength and Dex, which makes percentage all stats scale slightly higher for them than it does for all the other classes. So for them, the calculator will account for a 9 flame score in late game and a 10 flame score in end game, both for percentage all stat. Since Kana scales off of flat and percentage HP and MP, these stats are also shown in the grid to show that these flame stats do add damage to the character. Remember though that the Kana is the only class that has a secondary weapon that can be flamed. Since for the fan you give to Haku, the only thing that matters is your total magic attack, the only thing you really want to aim for is just tier 6 magic attack, and that's it. All the other stats that will later be described as plus stats will not increase your damage if they are on the flame of Haku's fan. If you do get a great flame on Haku's fan, my advice would be to switch and to redo the potentials, unless those are perfect already, of course. The final and biggest exception is Xenon. Since they have 3 main stats in Strength, Dex, and Luck, their flame scores work quite differently. 1% all stat for Xenon in late game is roughly equivalent to 15, and 1% all stat Xenon in end game is roughly equivalent to 22. Since the rough equivalent of funding for a Xenon compared to a non-Xenon is found by taking about 70% of the sum total of their 3 main stats, we will use the same calculation to see which flame scores they would be aiming for by multiplying by 10/7. So the numbers you'll be aiming for will be quite a bit higher because the same numbers will be way easier to achieve and will represent a lower level of damage increase for Xenon specifically. All of this is taken into account in the calculator. So now that we know what a flame score means and how to calculate it, the one thing you have to know is whether the item has flame advantage or not. Items with flame advantage will have realistically higher outcomes, and therefore we will set higher expectations of their flame score. And conversely, items without flame advantage, here called normal equips in this grid, will have higher variance in flame outcomes, will have much lower tiers rolled both in finding and in flaming, and therefore have lower expectations of flame outcome. To know which items have flame advantage and which ones don't, check the link in the description where you can see a compiled database with all of the equipment in the game that have flame advantage. After a while, you'll know for sure which items do and which ones don't, as it is the item's name that determines whether an item has flame advantage or not. It's not just a random roll that gets assigned to an equip when it drops. Now that you know what the flame score means, how to calculate it, and how the quality of the item will set different standards, all that's left is to give you a guiding score of what flame score to aim for, and you'll be able to tell the quality of the flame for any item always. So for this, you can simply look at the progression grid and look at the flame score goal. Higher stages have a range, since the item level will start varying between 140 and 200. You'll probably be equipping items such as the Pink Holy Cup at level 140, and maybe also arcane equips at level 200. Since the value of the flame score is connected to the tier of the roll, and the same tier on a higher level item can give you more flat stats, you'll be aiming for a higher flame score on higher level equips. In the late game, most of your equips are within the same range, so it doesn't really have a great impact there, and you can see that the range is rather small. Once you get to the end game, the range will be 140 to 200, which is a significant range, and therefore that is reflected in the numbers. As you can see here in the grid, the equip flame scores are separated from the weapon flames here. Because weapons have varying weapon and magic attack, and that is the main source of their damage, the main thing to aim for is a high tier of weapon or magic attack. But this is not a flat amount, this is a percentage of the base weapon or magic attack that the item has. Therefore, the main goal is to get a certain tier of weapon or magic attack, and sometimes a plus. The plus here stands for a combination of boss damage percentage, all stat percentage, or main stat. The further you go in the game, the more demanding you will get on these plus stats. The earlier in the game, the more weight will be on just getting the tier 5 or tier 6 on weapon or magic attack. So let's do one example for an item and one for a weapon. So here we have the picture of the item. The other piece of information that's very important is to know who is this for. So in this situation, this Pink Holy Cup is on my level 200 Hayato, and the goal with the character is to prep for CRA, and that's the end goal for this character. So now we turn to the calculator. The closest thing we can tick is late game. Obviously, trying to solo CRA, not quite end game, so we'll stick to late game. Second thing we do is we tick the normal strength user in the calculator. Third, we put in the numbers. So we have 20 dex, 20 luck, 6% all stat. And it'll automatically calculate our flame score of 53.5. The fourth thing we have to check is to know if the item has flame advantage or not. If you're unsure, you can check with the link that I referenced before, see if the item has flame advantage or not. You will find the item in the list, and therefore know that it has flame advantage. So the last thing that we do is we check the 53.5, and we check it with the grid. I'm currently in mid-game, and I'm about halfway through mid-game, according to my grid. So I take roughly half of the limits, with 40 being the lower end and 75 being the upper end, which is about 57.5. So this is 53.5, this is 4 score off. This is very close for me. This is close enough. I am upgrading upwards of 40 characters right now, and being off a few stat on one equip, it gets balanced out by other stats maybe having a little bit more than the target flame score. If I keep leveling this character and it would be my main character, I would eventually aim for higher, and probably aim for about a 75 flame score as I approach level 220. So my conclusion for this item is that in my current situation, this flame is good enough for me. Now let's go to the weapon example, also on the Hayato level 200 with the same goal. By the green numbers on this item, I can immediately tell that this item does not have flame advantage. Remember from the grid before, the variance on normal equips is 1 through 4 flame stats, whereas a flame advantage item always has 4. As you can tell here, there's only one stat being buffed, which is attack power. Therefore, this item cannot possibly have flame advantage. Again, if you have insecurities about this, you can check the database in the link, where you can tell that all the Sweetwater items are not mentioned and none of them have flame advantage. So now we take the right side of the calculator, which has the weapon flame tier calculator. We untick flame advantage because it does not have flame advantage as we just checked. You select level 160 to 199 and you enter the base attack of 180. Now you can already see the numbers 9, 20, 33, etc. pop up, and you can already see 33 there, that it is a tier 3. You can also enter the attack flame number below 33 and then click calculate, and tier 3 will pop up on top of the calculator. Either way is fine. If any number pops up and it is not in the list, then double check if you entered everything correctly. Since this is a bit of an exception, as it is a weapon only used as solo progression or transition into a Fafnir weapon, I will look at the best possible outcome to see if this is good enough. The grid mainly takes into account flame advantage items, especially your weapons, because weapon attack and magic attack are such huge damage boosts. Therefore, this item does not really fall into those categories. I'll look at the best possible outcome to see if this is good enough. The only slightly realistic outcome that would be better than this is 1 tier higher attack at 48, as you guys can tell up there. Because there's such high variance in flames, it's definitely not impossible, but for this character in this situation, I think, again, this is good enough. Items without flame advantage have generally very bad outcomes, and the expected cost to hit anything better is quite high. And like I said before, I'm funding 40 plus characters, so I'm okay with erring on the side of caution for now and just seeing how far I get with this character. If I do find that my character is way too weak, I can always reassess later. I don't want to overspend as I'm doing this level of funding on all of my jobs in the game right now. As a side note, this Hayato is part of ProjectCRA, where I will attempt to clear CRA solo either without CRA gear or with CRA gear after earning it through a struggle run with equally funded struggling players. To check the progress on that, you can check the link in the description. Now you know what a flame score is, how to easily tell if your flame is good enough or if it needs an improvement, and if it does need an improvement, how much of an improvement is realistic. Remember that flames have no events like star forcing or cubing, even though the cubing events have been questionable at best, which means that flaming is something you kind of do on the side, but not heavily invest into until the cost of cubing and star forcing becomes so astronomically prohibitive that it becomes more efficient to throw money at flaming instead. Remember to focus on your weapon, then your high level flame advantage items, then your lower level flame advantage items, then ultimately on your items without flame advantage. If you're using Starforce to upgrade, make sure you check out my TransferHammer and transposing video. It'll help you save a lot of money in the long term by using these mechanics. Speaking of transposing, since this is a flame score video, the flame score you want to aim for if you're transposing a Papulatus Mark or a Dominator Pendant into a Sweetwater Monocle or a Sweetwater Pendant respectively. Typically, for late game, you aim for 105 flame score. For end game, you will aim for the 115. I wish you guys all the best of luck, and I'll see you later.